My name is Jason Hines. I'm CEO and co-founder here at Gigasheet. And today we're going to talk about using price transparency data, specifically around cutting healthcare costs. This is ideal for folks in the self-insurance space ecosystem, whether you're a consultant or an employer, and you're looking to cut costs related to self-insurance. I will be demonstrating some general capabilities of Gigasheet as well, but that'll really be the focus and gist of today's discussion. So let's get into it. If you don't know about transparency and coverage, this rule came out in 2022 and the data was a huge mess and virtually unusable. We've been seeing people trying to upload large JSON files into Gigasheet since 2022 and even before then. And I can tell you the data really wasn't usable at all. I don't mean that in a way like it was too noisy to be used, or what I mean is the files were not well formed and were not at all correct. Formed JSON, and we just couldn't help people with it. Things started to change last year. About last summer, the government issued better guidance around the schemas, particularly for insurance companies, that they need to use to publish the data. And since then, it's actually become a tractable problem. There are still a lot of challenges, and we'll talk about some of those. And if you just download this data and look through JSON files, there are a lot of ways, a lot of pitfalls, a lot of challenges that will need to be overcome. We're working to make this a lot easier. At Gigasheet, we started the whole company to make complex and large data more accessible to people who are smart and analytical and have perhaps spreadsheet skills, but are not, data engineers, or maybe don't have access to a data engineering team. So as I mentioned, these files are huge, particularly insurance files can be multiple gigabytes. Same is true for hospital files as well. And they come in a JSON format, which is also known as an MRF, or machine-readable format. The key word there being machines. So machines can read this data, but humans really can't. And I will say, even machines struggle to read this data given some of these complexities like zombie rates. If you're not familiar with zombie rates, basically, so much data is published and insurance companies are interpreting the rules such that they provide a rate for every provider and every CPT code. So you get this huge combination of lines of data when you explode these JSON files, and much of it is irrelevant. More specifically, like for example, you would see things like a total knee replacement with an ophthalmologist, or a chiropractor doing open heart surgery, CPT associated with heart surgery. And it turns out that this data, it often goes into billions of rows of data, which is fine. Gigasheet works on large data. That doesn't bother us. But the bigger issue is, how do you filter and cleanse all that out? And we use a couple of approaches that are standard, and then we do some special stuff too using AI. But we've used historic claims data to look through that and say, okay, ophthalmologists don't do total knees, so this looks like garbage. We also look at taxonomy information for all the NPIs, and you'll see part of what we do is enrich this data so that we can say ophthalmologists don't do total knees based on their specialty. And there are other techniques that we use as well, but I'll leave it at that for now. Results can be hard to interpret, and we'll show you some of this data. We're going to get into it live and see how that goes. And you'll see that results can be hard to interpret, but with a little bit of working knowledge, you can figure it out. And then fields are often not aligned. Our system usually takes care of this automatically, but if you were to go out and do this on your own, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of complexities with this, and due to the size, it takes a lot of compute power. Not everyone can code and use databases, and they shouldn't have to work with this data. It's called price transparency data. Ironically, it's not very clear or transparent, but that's why we built this offering. It's called Gigasheet for Price Transparency Data, and we're going to talk about that today. Basically, what it is a pipeline where we run these MRF files through, and we do all the structuring, cleaning, on demand and enrichment on demand. So if you're a consultant or an employer and you're interested in a particular geographic region, or maybe you want to look at things nationwide, it's really up to you. It's very much driven based on that. So you don't have to settle for a pre-existing database that may or may not have coverage in your area or may not cover the payers in your area. Whatever it is, we'll source the MRFs and we can work with you to do that. We do the extraction, translation, loading in our pipeline. We do a lot of the deduplication and removal of those zombie rates I mentioned. And then we enrich the data. We'll be talking about some quality data that we've enriched in this example. But typically we'll include Medicare reimbursement rates and full MPI details. We have customers who are doing other types of enrichment like sales information. So basically contact information, sales intelligence. So if they want to reach out to providers to maybe recruit them to their network, or they want to use this data to sell. And that's just one example. And another example of an enrichment is quality data. In the example we'll look at today, we'll be using MIPS data. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the purpose, though, or the point is, whatever data source you have or are interested in, GigaSheet makes it easy to join or layer in those additional pieces of data. We can talk about that. And then, of course, we deliver it in our user interface, which I'll be showing you today, which makes it really easy to work with ginormous data sets. So rather than sending you a CSV of 400 million rows, it's not really usable. This way, you can slice and dice the data and explore it live in GigaSheet. And of course, if you want to, you can always export it. And then we can refresh the data periodically as needed. So that's kind of how our thing works. So more specifically, let's talk a little bit about cutting costs and how this data could be used for that, or is being used for that, I should say, within the self-insured ecosystem. And really, it's used in a bunch of different ways. It's used to compare prices across providers. So you could find providers that are maybe the exact same procedure, but are high quality. A great example of this would be like imaging, where many people don't realize that if they go to a certain facility and get an MRI, it's much more expensive than if they go to another. It's always going to be more expensive, for example, typically in the hospital. Or identifying providers that are just very high cost in your area, or facilities that have outlier charges that we see sometimes. And then the second is identifying high impact shoppable services. These two are what we're going to talk about in our demonstration today as we get into the data. But other things that we aren't going to touch as much on, but definitely people are doing, is collaboration. So one of the cool things about GigaSheet and the data that we'll show you today is it's a shared environment, and you can give access to other people either publicly or securely with a login, and you can work on the data together. If you're an employer and your consultant isn't using MRF or price transparency data, I would definitely encourage them to do that. It's not the silver bullet, but it is absolutely a key part or key piece of the puzzle here. And then hold third-party administrators accountable with better benchmarks. All third-party administrators say they have, the best value, the best in class, but price transparency data allows you to kind of look under the covers and see what's going on there in more detail. So with that, let's dive into GigaSheet and take a look. I should also mention, by the way, you're welcome to submit questions in the Q&A panel. I will come to those at the end of the demonstration presentation, and we'll come back to that. And I'll be happy to try to tackle your questions. So this is, for anyone who's new to GigaSheet, this is what the user interface looks like. We have a library, looks kind of like Google Drive or OneDrive maybe, or Dropbox, and you have files in here. I should mention you can also connect GigaSheet to databases. So if you use a data warehouse like Databricks or Snowflake or MySQL, GigaSheet can sit on top of that or even write back data to those underlying data stores. But for today, We're really talking about this MRF data and these JSON files in particular. We absolutely work with hospital files as well, and even often combine the data. It involves some crosswalking between codes and things like that, but it is also very doable. We have some examples of files in here that I will show you um, are in our interface here. So we've got these pediatrics multi-payer report that I've pulled up here, and it's just loading in now, and we'll see as it expands. But actually, you know what I'm going to do is reset this and just show you and kind of orient you to the interface and what MRF data looks like in Gigasheet once it's been run through our pipeline and process. So this is what you'll see. You'll see in this case, we have multiple payers in a single report. So I've got a payer column, whether it's professional or institutional, the negotiated rate, a description for that. I've added some additional columns of data here, and for this particular build of the data set, we can see whether it's like fee schedule, negotiated, or percentage type. This is sort of what the raw data looks like. There are basic feature functions I want to orient you to in Gigasheet. The first is filters. These work a lot like normal spreadsheet filters, but it works at on hundreds of millions of rows of data. So for example, if you wanted to say, I just want to look at rates that are greater than, 20, and I want to only filter to professionals here, you can do that just like you would in a regular spreadsheet. All the while, it's kind of building up your query here. So unlike a regular spreadsheet, you can get very complex. Typically, spreadsheets limit you to a couple filters per column, but Gigasheet allows you to add a ton of different conditions. So you can really drill down, and I'll show you how that works. So the second thing I want to mention about Gigasheet that makes it really powerful for any kind of exploratory data analysis is grouping. So groups, if you're familiar with a database, are a way to aggregate or bin data. So for example, if I want to know how many payers we have in this data set, I can see here a list of those, and then I've got a row count of how many for each. And as I expand this group, it will show me all the rows within it. I can also create subgroups. So let's say I wanted to look at the different procedures that are under each. So now I've grouped by payer and then by procedure name, and you can see this goes on, and you could do this as much as you need to. There are also abilities to do aggregations. Like I'm showing a row count here, but maybe I want to look at the average negotiated rate, and it will recalculate everything on demand. So those are some of the key basic features of Gigasheet and capabilities that you'll see me using as we go through this particular analysis here. So next, what I want to highlight, we always get this question is, can I export this? Yes, at any time. You can export this as a CSV. You could publish it, share it with someone, or even link it to BI tools and so forth. So that's kind of a very, very short introduction to Gigasheet. There's a lot of other stuff here that we'll talk about, like ways to quickly survey all this data. It's really meant to make big data super easy to work with. So how are we going to use this data? How might we use this data to identify sources of high value care, like high quality, low cost providers? Can we use it to do that? And we're going to try. We're going to do it today. So what I have here is nationwide Aetna data for a basket of high cost CPT codes. We actually have nationwide data available. So if you were interested in purchasing this, we'd be happy to sell it to you right out of the box and ready to go. Or if you're interested in more specialty regions, we can process MRF data on demand. But in this case, we have a basket of CPTs, and I'll use that grouping to take a look at what's in here. So you can kind of see how many rates we have. So each one of these lines is going to be a negotiated rate for this particular billing code. we also have included the Medicare reimbursement rate and the percentage. So 169% in this case, and we see some people are getting 340%. As I scroll to the right, you'll see the NPI details. Now, NPIs are included in the MRF. It does take some kind of walking back to get there. But what we've done is correlated this or joined this with the NPI registry data and brought in all of the details about the location. We've also cleaned up the taxonomy codes. So we can see here, these are gastroenterologists, makes sense. If they have license information in the NPI registry, we've pulled that in, as well as contact information. So this is what this data set looks like today. And I'll show you how we can use that to drill into a hypothetical scenario. So let's take a look at colonoscopy. In particular, I'll pick well, we can use this one. Let's go with colonoscopy with lesion removal. Let's say we have an employee, for example, hypothetically, or we want to investigate a particular claim, or we're looking at shoppable services. Whatever the pretense may be, we're going to take a look at just these particular colonoscopies. You'll see me use some of these right-click shortcuts in the product, like I'm going to filter just to this particular code here, and then I'll show you a bunch of shortcuts at the end, how we can get back to that. So in this case, I will remove the grouping and just look at the raw data. If I check my filter here, I could see the name equals colonoscopy with lesion removal, but of course I could jump to any of those that are in this list. So cool. In this case, we're going to just look at Dallas, Texas, and I'll show you how we do that. Actually, let's go back to the filters here, and we'll choose state. So we have practice provider location state equals, and then we'll pick Texas. And I want to also look at Dallas, so we will focus on city here. And then hit apply. So we started with millions of rows of data. I forget exactly how many millions of rows we had in this particular example. I can go back to it in a second. So we started with millions of rows of data, and we're filtering down to just colonoscopy with lesion removal in Dallas, Texas. And here we go. Here's the data. So in this case, I can see we've got a bunch of results. Actually, we have 1,100 rows out of the 1.8 million nationwide that are providers located in Dallas that have a negotiated rate with Aetna. We could obviously sort this and see who's getting what, at least based on this negotiated rate. But let's also take a look at quality data. So you can see here, I've brought in some columns in this particular example with MIPS scores. Now, quality data is highly subjective. I don't know if MIPS is necessarily the absolute best or what you want to use, but it serves as a great demo example, and the data is all public, which makes it easy to show off. So if you're not aware what MIPS is published by CMS, and it's their quality for payment incentivization program, and they publish all of the data. So it serves as a good data set for demonstration purposes. And we actually have that, and I think we have it published on our sample data site that's freely available if you're interested. And it looks like this. So it's got NPI, provider information, and then scores. So scores based on various different categories with different weightings. You can read all about that on the CMS website. I'm not going to get into all of it, but for demonstration purposes, we've got it here. And we're going to focus on just the final MIPS score to keep things simple. So let's take a look at this. Let's improve our query to look at, I'm looking at colonoscopy with lesion removal in Dallas, Texas, but I only want to look at, let's say, a Medicare percentage is less than 130% of Medicare, and I want a quality score um, that is greater than 70, let's say. So hit apply. And effectively, what I'm looking for here is people who have high quality and reasonable cost or low cost. Of course, you could tweak this however you like. And you can even save these queries so you don't have to do all of this every single time. I'm just showing it this way for demonstration purposes, but we have a handy ability to save filters here where you can save it and come back to it and edit it at any point in the future. I'll talk about another shortcut that we call views, which are like bookmarks. And so let's say you were helping employees navigate for care. You could create bookmarks to common requests that you might get. So for example, like I think I have some views. I didn't save one. We'll create this. We'll create one here now, actually, to process. Like I'm doing lots of querying here, but basically we can jump back to this at any time and start all over. Let's do this and refresh the page. But this is basically how it works. It's taking longer than normal, but we'll get back to it relatively quickly here. So if I rebuild my filters, in reality, I wouldn't do this. I would do colonoscopy with lesion removal. And then I was in Dallas, Texas. So let's do city. And state. So that was what I did then. And then what I'll do is actually save this as a view so I can come back to it later. And basically that would allow me to, with views, to give this to someone and then have them come in and change the city state and pick their own capability from own CPT from the list, for example. So looks like, there we go. So here we have the results. Looks a little slower than normal, but we've got it. And then I wanted to filter to a MIPS score that was greater than, let's say, 70. I think is what I had. Give that a second to process. And actually what I'll do is save this so I could say like, type, and then add it. And I can bookmark this so I can come back to it later. And then I can change locations or change CPD codes. Things look like they're running slower than normal, but this is how it works. So that's a quick view of how Gigasheet for price transparency operates and how it works. And there are lots of different ways to slice and dice this data and group it as you saw. So usually the way it works is our clients select locations or payers and then specific specialties, but sometimes we do nationwide and for a basket of all taxonomies and as well as CPT codes and pre-process that data and serve it up. That's basically what I had in mind for sharing today about price transparency data and how folks we're seeing in the market are using it to cut costs, particularly with those shoppable services and investigating high value, high quality providers who have a reasonable price. Happy to take questions at this time if we have some. Let's see. I do have one in the Q&A panel. Just arrange my screens here. I'm a researcher looking to work with this data in your own database. Yes, we are able to pass this data to a database. It's a good question. I should have mentioned we have APIs that everything you saw me do in the user interface is available via an API. So if you are comfortable with databases and you want to use it just purely as kind of like a pipeline to prepare and process data, you can absolutely use Gigasheet that way. And often people will use the user interface for data quality inspection along the way. Uh, the second question here, let me just see. Looks like we've pulled MRFs across the country already. Um, do we have an inventory of available files and plans? Yes. So this question was like, do we already have a bunch of pre-processed data? Yes, we are starting to accumulate, as you might imagine, quite a repository of pre-processed data that's ready to go. Yes, we do have some that's available on a nationwide basis for um, several thousand CPTs, I believe, and associated taxonomies where it's like already cleaned and ready to go. Um, and then we also can create subsets for specific specialties. So, like if you were researching um, orthopedics, for example, we can easily create these baskets of specialty and code combinations, or we can sort of do a blanket approach and do everything. Obviously, the cost uh, changes when you're dealing with so much data, but yeah, we've done both. So we do have a set of files. And actually, we will be offering just like a flat rate for pre-processed data that you can purchase and consume in the user interface, load into your database if you'd like. And of course, we're happy to help you do that. So thank you for that question. I have another question. Can other users across the organization see your saved views? They can, actually. So if I go back into this and share again, I I will show you. So I created this saved view for colonoscopy Texas. And as I mentioned, maybe next week I come in here and I don't want Dallas. I want like Charlotte, um, North Carolina, let's say. You could just come in here and change this from Texas to this and leave the same criteria, however you like to look at it and do that. And then, so I have a couple of options. I could save this view as like Charlotte, North Carolina, or I could just save a generic one where I haven't specified anything. And then what I can do is copy a link to this view. So if I know you work with the folks in Texas, I could give you a link to this view, or I can duplicate it and create others or create a linked sheet. So lots of different ways to share slices of the data here and collaborate on it together. It's even possible to have different um, so sometimes, we see people who are responsible for different things in the organization, whether that's a different region or geography where the views are configured accordingly. So they don't have to wade through, nationwide data like I'm showing here if they only work with a handful of states or locales, for example. And it just makes things go a lot quicker, as you might imagine. So thank you for that question about views. You can also just share the sheet wholesale as well. Let's see if there are other questions that I haven't gotten to. Um, mhm. Mentioned the API thing. I see a question here about the API. Yes, it is a REST-based API, and it is available with all of our plans. You can actually try it out. And if you're interested, I can send you the API, share our API documentation with you. Um, let's see. I think there was one more question in the chat, maybe. No, I think that was it. Cool. Well, that's a little bit about Gigasheet's tools that we use for price transparency data. Today, we didn't really get into hospital data. It works very similarly. Now, with hospitals, you have a different perspective, really. It doesn't usually include NPI data, so the provider information is different. But it becomes really powerful when you start to crosswalk between the hospital codes and the CPT codes that are found in the insurance files. And you can even use the NPIs from the hospitals to kind of see what their negotiated rates are. So there are a lot of different possibilities and moving parts. And we provide an environment that makes it really easy to join these data sets, to cross-correlate, enrich, and also a pipeline to clean MRF data. So if you're interested in any of that, we'd love to talk to you. You can always drop us a line at sales@gigasheet.com. Or if you have technical questions, hit us up at support@gigasheet.com. We'd be happy to show you some example data or even send you a link where you can play with some data on your own, one of those shared views. So thanks for joining today. Really appreciate it. And thank you. So long.